the sound of the drums and the sound of the shakeré lets you know it's time for the Griot Story Circle. Welcome. Come join the Story Circle. I'm Sister Martha Ruff, and this is a time for us to share the stories of African American history. Let's remember those forgotten heroes of Black history. Langston Hughes wrote a poem that helped us remember that Black history goes back through the ages. His poem, I've Known Rivers, his poem is called The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And think about the rivers as the times when African American history started long ago as humanity began. And Langston Hughes says, I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. I've known rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when the dawn was young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. I've seen its muddy bosom turn golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. And that's The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes. And this book is a book that has won a special award, the Coretta Scott King Award. And this book is called The Negro Speaks of Rivers, and it's illustrated by E.B. Lewis. Now, Coretta Scott King is one of the forgotten heroes of Black history. Yes, we talk about her husband, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but we have to remember that Coretta Scott King was also a hero of the movement. She stood beside her husband. She marched with him. She took care of their family and raised their children. And when Dr. King was assassinated and died, Coretta Scott King went on to carry on the movement. So we remember Coretta Scott King. And librarians have remembered Coretta Scott King by making an award for her, in memory of her, in honor of her. And that award is the Coretta Scott King Award for books about the African American experience. And this book, Heart and Soul, won 2 Coretta Scott King Awards. It won the Coretta Scott King Award for the writing, and then it was a runner-up for the Coretta Scott King Award for the illustrations. And this book is illustrated by Kadir Nelson. And in Heart and Soul, we see a woman tell the story of African American history. Yes, it's February, it's Black History Month, and we want to remember those forgotten heroes of Black history. Well, one person that we should remember can help us to have Black history with our littlest children. And so one way to help them celebrate Black history is to play a game. Now, many of our little children learn nursery rhymes. Well, Black History Month would be a good time to make up new nursery rhymes for them. Nursery rhymes about Black history. Well, maybe we make up one about Laurel. If you know the area of Laurel in our town called the Grove, you know that that's where in the 1800s many African Americans lived, and they worked and raised families, and they had a church that was kind of the heart of the community, St. Mark's United Methodist Church. And right across from that church, which is on 8th Street in Laurel, there's a park, and they call it Emancipation Park, because there were many times when Emancipation Day was celebrated as a gathering in that park. And people would come from all around to celebrate the day that African Americans were liberated from their enslavement. And so they would gather and have a parade. The children would play games, and there would be lots of food, and they would enjoy their community. So let's make up a poem, a rhyme about Emancipation Park. And you might say, coming from the north, coming from the south, people come to Laurel to Emancipation Park. And that could be just the beginning of your poem. Now you add some more to it and teach it to your young children. I wrote a poem about a famous African American. His name was Nat King Cole. And Nat King Cole was a singer, but he also was someone who broke barriers in African American history. He had one of the first shows on television, one of the first African Americans to have a TV show. And so, as we have this TV show, we have to remember Nat King Cole. And Nat King Cole had a trio that he played with, a bass player and a drum, and he would play the piano. And this is the poem, the nursery rhyme I made about Nat King Cole. See if you remember which nursery rhyme it's like. Nat King Cole was a merry old soul, and a merry old soul was he. He called for his bass player. Dun, 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 dun. He called for his drummer. Ta-tat, ta-tat, ta-tat. And he sat down at his piano and he played. Tink, tink. And he sat down at his piano and he played. Tink, tink. And that's Nat King Cole, who was a singer, a musician, and a first in African American history. Now, I said we should play games with our children. And one of the games that I play is a chant that will help children say their rhymes. And so, you might give them the chance to play the drum if they can say a nursery rhyme or a poem that they've made up. And it goes like this. The drummer, you get to be the drummer if you can say a rhyme and say it in time. You'll get to be the drummer. So then the children would say their rhyme, and then they would get a chance to play the drum if they can say a rhyme. But if they can't say a rhyme, Then you go to the next person, and they'll be thinking, if they miss their turn, they'll be thinking of a rhyme that they can say when their turn comes again. So here it is one more time. You try it. The drummer, you'll get to be the drummer if you can say a rhyme and say it in time. You'll get to be the drummer. So I hope you will play that game with your young people. Now, one of the things that we remember about Black History Month is the person who created it. Lots of people say, it's Black History Month, it's February, but they forget that there had to be a time when someone said, let's celebrate Black history. And that time happened back in 1926 when Dr. Carter G. Woodson said, we need to have our young people celebrate their heritage. Carter G. Woodson grew up in the late 1800s, and he said that as poor as he was going to get as much education as he could. Even though he worked in the coal mines, he went to school at night. And even when he was sent away in the army to be in the Philippines, he took a correspondence class with the University of Chicago. And he got his doctorate from the University of Chicago. He got his degree from the University of Chicago. And then he went on to Harvard and got his doctorate. He was one of the second African Americans to get a doctorate from Harvard University. And so in February, it started out as a week. The second week in February was Negro History Week in 1926. And then teachers and churches and community groups began celebrating Negro history until in 1970, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History said, let's celebrate the whole month. And so we have been since then. February has become the month to celebrate African American history. And when you are celebrating, make sure that you share the name of the person who began Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Don't let him be a forgotten hero of Black history. When you study Black history, sometimes you're reminded of the things of some people as you're studying. And that's what happened with the film Selma. Hopefully you have gone to see that movie and you have heard some of the people that were in that movie. And one of the forgotten heroes of that movie were some of the names that I'm going to call now. And some of them are still with us. In the movie Selma, they talk about Harry, and then they sing, Day-o, day-o, daylight come and me wanna go home. Who are they talking about? They're talking about Harry Belafonte. And again, Harry Belafonte is a singer and a civil rights activist. Harry Belafonte gathered money and famous people to come participate in the March on Selma. Now, Selma, Alabama, in 1965 was a place of segregation. It was a place where African Americans couldn't vote, where they had to have separate schools and separate restaurants and facilities. They might have to go in the back door to go to a restaurant, or they might have to draw a picture. They might have to trace their foot on a piece of paper and take it to the store to buy a pair of shoes. They couldn't try on the shoes or hats or clothes in a store. That is what the movie Selma shows us. And in that movie, another person that you don't hear, many of our young people might not know about, is John Lewis. John Lewis was in his 20s when he was in Selma helping to register people to vote. And they would send thousands of people, hundreds of people, to the courthouse to register to vote. They sent 300 people to register to vote, and only 56 people were allowed into the courthouse. And then when they went in, they had to take a test. I saw that test recently. 3 pages of 30 or more questions. Questions like, what is on the Constitution? How does the Constitution begin? How many judges are there in our county? Questions that Dr. Martin Luther King said even the Supreme Court justice might not know all of the answers to those questions. Well, John Lewis helped lead the marches in Selma, Alabama. And when he did, he suffered the consequences. Trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, he was among those folks that were battered and beaten by police that stopped them from crossing that bridge. And even to this day, John Lewis is a congressman serving in Congress, and he can show you the bruises on his head from that day known as Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. So remember John Lewis and Harry Belafonte. When you go to see the movie Selma, pick up some other names and find out more about them. One set of names that you'll learn right at the beginning of the movie are 4 little girls. And there's a poem about them by Dr. Benjamin Chavis. And he talks about those 4 little girls and what happened to them on that Sunday morning in September 15, 1963. And his poem is called Cynthia, Denise, Carol, and Addie. Dear God, it is September 15. I wonder, oh God, how many people still remember what day this is. O God of justice, O God of peace, hear my prayer, hear my cry, hear my scream. It is this prison cell, it is my blackness, it is my faith that causes me to remember. Cynthia Wesley, 14 years old. Denise McNair, 13 years old. Carol Robertson, 14 years old. And Addie Mae Collins, 14 years old. Oh God, these thy children, black girls, went to Sunday school on September 15th, 1963. Oh God, our little sisters went to the 16th Street Baptist Church down in Birmingham, Alabama. Our little sisters, bless them, oh God. That kind of hate that destroyed our little sisters is still around, oh God. It is September 15th. I wonder, oh God, How many people still remember what day it is? So find out more about those four little girls, Cynthia, Carol, Addie, and Denise. Find out how they were a part of the civil rights movement in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. Now, one thing Selma doesn't do is it doesn't share as much about the children as happened in real life. Now, you can only include so much in a movie, but we need to remember that children were a very big part of the civil rights movement. Now, those four girls were just going to Sunday school, but you will find out that there were often gatherings and meetings at the 16th Street Baptist Church, so they knew about the civil rights movement. And the same thing is true in Selma. In Selma, the children joined in because they knew how important it was, but also because they had nothing to lose. Their parents were hesitant to join the march and the movement. They would lose their jobs. They would be put out of their houses with no jobs and no income. But the children knew what was right, and they knew that things had to change. And two of the children that wrote a book about their participation in the Selma March were Cheyenne Webb and Rachel West. It was a clear day. It was sunny. And Cheyenne was just trying to decide what ribbon to wear in her hair and which dress she would wear to school that day. She was in the 3rd grade in Selma, Alabama, and if she didn't hurry, she was going to be late for school because she had heard that her father had left, and she usually left right after him. And as she said goodbye to her mother, Cheyenne went out the door and headed across the road and started on her way to school, but she noticed there were a lot of people at the chapel, at the church near their house. And she stopped to look and see what they were doing. And then she remembered Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been at that church on Sunday, and he had talked about the fact that they needed to get their right to vote. Cheyenne knew she should go to school, but she had something that just led her to walk across the street to the church, slip in the back, and listen to what was going on. And there were people talking and discussing what should they do in Selma to make things change. And Cheyenne would always remember one man who got up and said, "If we don't have the right to vote, we are just like slaves." And she thought about that. She knew that her mother and father couldn't vote. Did that make them slaves? About 1 o'clock, they stopped the meetings, and Cheyenne realized maybe she should go to school. And so she tried to go into school without anyone noticing, but of course her teacher had missed her that morning. And she said, "Cheyenne Webb, where were you this morning?" "I was at the church," she said. "At the church?" said the teacher. "Do you know what's going on over there? People are going to get hurt. You shouldn't be there." And without answering back, because she was very polite, Cheyenne took her seat and stayed at school the rest of the day. But she couldn't forget those things that she had heard. And so the next day, she talked to her friend Rachel. They were best friends. And Cheyenne and Rachel said, let's just go and find out what's going on. And that's what they did. They slipped into the church and they listened. And when they did, they found out that there was going to be a march. And one of the things that happened that they really will never forget was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was there. Cheyenne and Rachel got a chance to talk to him, and he played with them. He said, "What do you want?" They said, "Freedom." "I can't hear you," said Dr. King. "What do you want?" "Freedom." And that was a game that Cheyenne and Rachel played with Dr. King whenever he came to Selma. He would sit in the church, and while he was waiting to talk, sometimes they would be able to sit on the pulpit with him. And they were in the march that took them from Selma, Alabama, to the capital city, Montgomery, Alabama, so that they could tell the governor that they wanted freedom, freedom, freedom. And that was the year, 1965, that President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and African Americans gained their right to vote without hindrance. Cheyenne Webb and Rachel West are two people that we don't want to forget who were part of our African American history. So remember, read, and find out more about those forgotten heroes of African American history. And we'll see you next time when we hear the drum and hear the shakeree and join together for the Griot Storytelling Circle.